Let's all turn to the Gospel of John, chapter 1. John, chapter 1. Once again, great to see everybody this morning. We're glad for our visitors. It's a real treat to have some here from Peterborough and the West End. Certainly want to extend tremendous thanks for every kindness that's been shown my family and I this weekend. Certainly want to thank John and Verna for having us in their home, for a good meal, back to their place for a potluck yesterday, and out for breakfast this morning. You've gone above and beyond, and we thank you for that. And to William and Shelley and Linda, who have given us 5-star treatment at their place, it's very much appreciated. So it's refreshing to be able to get out and to spend time with other brethren here in Ontario. Our prayers will certainly be with the work that's going on here, the good work, and I appreciate your prayers for the work going on at the West End in Toronto, at the East End as well. Certainly our prayers should always be with all the congregations here in Ontario and here in Canada. There's so much to do. It can be rather overwhelming, really. And I get discouraged once in a while because I'll have a call or an email from someone that's looking for a place to worship in this city or that city here in Canada, and I'll have to tell them there's, it's about 500 miles. I had a sister in the States write me a few years ago wanting to know where her son could go to worship in Saskatoon. He was going to be going to college there, and I said, well, it's going to be about a 5-hour drive. Sometimes I wonder why people don't check that first before they agree to go somewhere. Make sure there's a congregation there before you decide to go and live in that place or work or study in that place. But I'm sure you're all aware, and I'm just going to briefly go over the situation as I know it here in Canada, as far as the church is concerned. When you start at the East Coast, in Newfoundland, as far as I know, I hope I'm wrong, but there's no faithful congregation. Nova Scotia is the same. Prince Edward Island is the same. There's one in Moncton, where Bob Rubel is, in New Brunswick. And I've been told in Quebec that there is a small Spanish-speaking work in Montreal, but that's the only one that I know of in that province. And here in Ontario, I think we have 10 or so faithful congregations. And then when you get to Manitoba, as far as I know, there's none. Same is true in Saskatchewan. There's a few in Alberta, maybe 4 or 5. And British Columbia has, to my knowledge, has 2 small ones. The one that I'm with, which is right down near the Washington state border. And then when you get to the territories, again, as far as I know, there's nothing. That's pretty grim. But we ought not to lose heart. We're thankful for the faithful there are, and I pray and hope that there are other groups that are meeting that I just don't know about. And I hope there are other ones. But it certainly places upon us a tremendous responsibility and obligation and challenge to try and get the word out. One of the things I pray for as well is are for some of our Canadian brethren that are preaching in the U.S. to come back. Now, some will look at me and say, you're a little hypocritical, John. You were in Florida for 11 years, which I was. But after I'd been in Florida for 4 years, I was looking for somewhere to go. And tried and a couple times thought about coming back, and finally did in 2005. And I'm glad to be back, and I don't intend to leave again. There's just so much to do, which is all a part of what we want to discuss this morning in this lesson. Who have you told? In the Gospel of John in chapter 1 and verse 43, it says, the following day Jesus wanted to go to Galilee, and he found Philip and said to him, follow me. Now Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, we have found him, of whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. But notice, Philip meets the Lord, and the Lord says, follow me. Philip doesn't keep it to himself, does he? Philip knows that he has found the Messiah. Philip knows he has found something wonderful and great, and he does not keep it to himself. And we are left then with a great example. We ought not to keep it to ourselves either. But you know, when we find out about something, for example, and the question is, what do you do when you find out about a really great job offer? You've got a job, but you find out that there's this job opportunity. Well, you know, the first thing I hope what you're going to think is, hey, my brother's looking for work, my friend's looking for work, this person's looking for work, and let them know about it. You find a great restaurant, what do? Well, you take us to it for breakfast. You don't keep it to yourself. If we find a restaurant that we really like, chances are we're going to tell somebody. Or you get some good news from home. The congregation that I work with in Toronto, the West End congregation, we're in the high 30s, if all are there, and more than half of them are Filipinos. And when there's good news from home, they talk about it. They share it with each other and with us. Of course we do. Someone we love is in trouble. We try to help them, and we let others know about that need. Their brethren in Uganda. Word came to the congregation here that there's a drought there, a famine. And so acting on that information, this congregation has sent aid to these brethren because it's a dire need. Someone, was it Brother Sharp? Brother Sharp let you know about this need because he loves them. He knew about the need. He didn't keep that need to himself. He let others know. Something great happens in our life. You find out your wife's going to have a baby. Now, typically, you wait a few months just to make sure everything is okay, but then as soon as you can, you tell people. Why? Because you're excited. You've finally been approved for an adoption. What? Man, I'm pretty sure Shelley didn't keep it to herself. She let others know. That's what we do. In the Gospel of Luke, let's just turn there. Luke chapter 15. And you know, as we were eating our breakfast this morning, and I was talking to John and Verna and reminiscing about my maternal grandparents, my grandfather Phil Wismer, my grandmother Doreen Wismer. My grandmother, at a very early age, was diagnosed with arthritis and severe arthritis. So we come years later to when I was a little boy. She died when I was about 10. So, but when I was just a young lad, she couldn't play with me. She was bedfast. But she talked to me, and she would tell me stories. And these are some of the stories that I remember. Her telling me these parables. In Luke 15 and verse 4, what man of you having 100 sheep, if he loses one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after one which is lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing. And when he has come home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep, which was lost. Here's a man who has lost that one sheep. In this account, what does he do? He leaves the 99 that are safe, and he goes and he searches until he finds it. And when he finds it, he brings it back home and he has a party. They rejoice together. This is his livelihood. One sheep mattered. Michelle and I have 5 children. 2 of them are with us today, Heather and Lucy. But back years ago when we still just had 4, living in Florida. My wife's father worked at Disney World, so we would go once in a while. And one day, it was Michelle and I and Chuck and Imelda, her folks, and we had Jack and Deanna and Philip and Heather. And it was the end of the day, and we were heading back out of Epcot, the park we were visiting. And, you know, there's 4 adults and 4 children. So it should have been fine. Except I'm not always as observant as I should be. And all of a sudden, we get to a certain point, and we've got Deanna and Philip and Heather, but no Jack. There's nothing quite as terrifying as losing a child, especially in a situation like that. It's a huge park, and there's all kinds of places where a child could be in serious trouble. And there's lots of people there, so they're strangers. And so what do? We immediately tell somebody that works there, because as soon as you tell them at Disney that you've lost a child, a message goes right to the gates. Nobody leaves that park with a child unless they can prove that that is their child, which is a great safety thing. But we looked it seemed like it was an hour. It was probably about 10 minutes. And all of a sudden, I look across the way, and there's Jack sitting on a stand with a couple of the workers eating ice cream. But the point in all this is, I told people that I was looking for Jack. When something happens, something like that, you don't keep it to yourself. You let people know so that they can have their eyes open too. And when we found Jack, it was a time of rejoicing. And I was telling people, we lost him and we found him. That's what you do. In chapter 8 of, verse 8 of Luke chapter 15. Or what woman, having 10 silver coins, if she loses 1 coin, does not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she has found it, she calls her friends and neighbors together, saying, rejoice with me, for I have found the piece which I lost. And to us, that sounds kind of strange. So she lost 1, but that doesn't seem such a big deal. But this is all she has, no doubt. And there was no credit cards back then. There's no lines of credit. She needs every one of those coins to survive. And she finds it. And she doesn't keep that joy to herself. She tells others. In verse 22, we come down to the parable of the prodigal son. And the prodigal son at this point has come back. And the father said to his servants, bring out the best robe and put it on him, put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet, and bring the fatted calf here and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to be merry. He saw his son afar off. He doesn't just keep it to himself. He doesn't enjoy that joy untold to himself. He tells his servants. He has a party put together. There's a celebration. When we find out about these things that we've discussed, when something good has happened or something bad has happened, we're going through some struggle, we tell people. Of course we do. And here's something else. When we have some good news to tell, or even if we've got some bad news to share, we like to be the one that tells it, especially the good news. It's something great has happened. I've had this happen. You're there with your kids, and they know about it. You're about to tell them, and then one of them blurts it out. I wanted to tell them. What did you tell them for? I wanted to tell. We like to tell good news. Yeah, it's human nature that we like to do that. Ugh. We love to communicate. Now, to be sure, some are less communicative than others. Some people are shy. Some people are quiet. I have a cousin who really likes to be on his own. And he stays to himself and keeps to himself. But he doesn't always keep to himself. He still needs interaction. We have an inborn need to interact with others. And our God, I'm confident our God has built this need into us. And I say that because we know God likes to and has from the very beginning communicated with us. He walked and talked with Adam and Eve in the garden. He spoke to the fathers under the patriarchal age. He spoke to Moses and gave to Moses the law. He sent his son, Jesus, who has communicated with us, and he's given us Old Testament scripture, and he's given us the New Testament scripture. God talks to us And God desires that communication between us and himself. We talked about that as we discussed in one of our lessons, the need for us to be praying that we might be spiritually strong. We need to have that prayer life where we talk with God and we communicate with God. And God wants that. He desires that of us. In our previous lesson, we considered how great our God is. And actually, it's going to be in our next lesson. I got these two mixed turned around. But in our next lesson, we're going to talk about how great our God is. And whether it be his knowledge and wisdom, his strength and creativity, his love and graciousness, each are without limit. Truly, as we think about our God, he is an awesome God. Now, knowing this, can you imagine anything more worthy of communicating than how great our God is? Let's just go back to the book of Genesis in chapter 1. Genesis chapter 1. I want to read together with you from this chapter. Genesis 1 and verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the evening and the morning were the first day. Then God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." And thus God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven. So the evening and the morning was the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb that yields seed, and the fruit tree that yields fruit according to its kind, whose seed is in itself on the earth." And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, the herb that yields seed according to its kind, and the tree that yields fruit, whose seed is in itself according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. So the evening and the morning were the third day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens, to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons, and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heavens, to give light on the earth." And it was so. And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. God set them in the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. So the evening and the morning were the fourth day. Then God said, "Let the waters abound with an abundance of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the face of the firmament of the heavens." So God created great sea creatures and every living thing that moves, with which the waters abounded according to their kind, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth." And so the evening and the morning were the fifth day. And then God said, "Let the earth bring forth the living creature according to its kind, cattle and creeping thing and beast of the earth, each according to its kind." And it was so. And God made the beast of the earth according to its kind, cattle according to its kind, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them. God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And God said, see, I have given you every herb that yields seed, which is on the face of all the earth, and every tree whose fruit yields seed. To you it shall be for food. Also to every beast of the earth, to every bird of the air, to everything that creeps on the earth, in which there is life. I have given every green herb for food. And it was so. Then God saw everything that he had made. And indeed it was very good. So the evening and the morning were the sixth day. And thus the heavens and the earth and all a host of them were finished. And on the seventh day God ended his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. Isn't it awesome that God has communicated to us, that God has not kept the creation story from us, but has shared it with us? Many balk at it today. Many deny it. Many say it's just the fanciful imaginations of ancient writers. But we know that this is true, that this is the actual history of all things. This is where everything came from. God spoke, and it happened. This is the power of God. Can you imagine anything that is more worthy of communicating than the words that we have just read? It boggles the mind. There's no way for us to understand how God did what he did in chapter 1. It's so far beyond us. We are truly like a worm, as opposed to the great God of all things. But whether we understand it or not, this is what happened. Can you imagine a story more worthy of communicating than this? Can you imagine any greater news than the salvation that is readily available to us through the indescribable gift that God has given to us, his own Son? For God so loved the world that he gave us his only beloved Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. It really is, again, something that just boggles my mind, how God could love us so much when we are so often so wicked. When Jesus came, the world turned its back on him. Ones that should have embraced him, having had the Old Testament scriptures and all the prophecies in their hands for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, they should have immediately known this is the Messiah, especially when they saw him performing those miracles and preaching the good news. It should have just been readily available. This is the one. This is the one. But they didn't. Out of envy and spite and hatred, they rejected him. And yet, for such as this, God was willing to send his Son. And not just to send his Son, but to know that he would die, as Paul would say it, even death of the cross. That makes it even more wondrous and amazing. And I'm sure you've heard or maybe read an account of what a crucifixion was like, and how horrible it was, how cruel it was. I remember when I lived in Kentucky, I was visiting a congregation on a Sunday morning, and a man there, a farmer, had put together from thorns that he had found a crown of thorns. And whether or not that was exactly like the one Christ wore or not of it, there's no way to know. But it was a terrifying thing to look at. and to, you touch it and you feel how sharp those thorns on, and you know that they weren't gentle with Jesus when they put it on his head. They would have just rammed it on there. And they weren't gentle with Jesus when they put the nails into his hands and feet. They certainly weren't gentle going back to when they scourged him. There was no gentleness. There was no civility. It was just cruelty upon cruelty upon cruelty upon cruelty. God knew this was going to happen, and Jesus knew it would happen to him. And yet, the gift was given. Can you imagine? Any news that we might have to share that's greater than this news? Who has done more for you than God? In 24 plus years now, Michelle has done so many amazing things for me. And I feel ashamed sometimes when I compare, and I feel like she's done so much more for me than I have for her, but the fact remains, she's done so much for me. I think back to my childhood and the sacrifices that my mom and dad made for me. And I know they did. And for my sister Dina and my brother Eric. They made sacrifices, and they did so much for us. And my dad never made a lot of money, but he made our childhood very pleasant and enjoyable. And yeah, we'd go on vacations. And I didn't find out till years later that Dad always took, money with him. We only had so much. But with the little he had, it was always such a great time. They did so much for us, but God has done so much more. God blesses us every day. Every time we lift a fork to our mouth, we might think to ourselves, I worked hard and I earned the money to buy this, but God gave us our life. God gave us our abilities. God has blessed us with our work and with that money that came from that work. And he's blessed us with a country that has allowed us to be able to go out and buy food in abundance. There are people in this world like in Uganda. If we were to bring them here and take them into a No Frills, one of our lower end grocery stores, it would just blow them away. They wouldn't be able to believe it. I think it would be hard for them to comprehend what they were seeing. That much food. And then to think about the waste that goes on in this country. Back where I grew up in the Niagara area in Jordan Station, farmers are given quotas. Say a peach farmer, there's a quota. And then they're told to throw away the rest. And they're sort of forced into just doing that. Just throw it away. It's perfectly good, but just throw it away. It's interesting, in the Philippines, there are actually businesses that will go to, they have a restaurant chain there called Jollibee. It's kind of like KFC. It's a chicken place. It's very popular there. And they've got KFC and they've got McDonald's. They've got lots of our restaurants and their own. There are actually businesses that send people to those places to get their scraps, even out of the garbage. And that food will be processed. They'll churn it up into like a sludge, and they'll put it in a plastic bag. And then, for maybe 50 pesos, you can buy one of those bags of food. Imagine the level of poverty that allows that. That would never be allowed here, would it? Oh my, never, ever. I saw a video put together from the Philippines where there's a man, and he would go to these different restaurants and go through the garbage, and some of them would save him some of their scraps, and he's on a bicycle and he takes this food to a village, and here come all these children, and they're just so happy as he distributes this food to them, and then he takes his bike home and has some left, and that's what his family have for their meal that night. And one of the children goes to take a piece, and he stops them, and then they pray. You wouldn't see that on a commercial here, would you? And then they eat their food. I get kind of teary just thinking about it. I've been to Manila in the Philippines. I've seen the poverty there. I've spent 2 months in India with my father on 2 different occasions, and I have seen poverty that you see it on TV, you see images, but until you've actually been there and you're right in front of it and you smell it and you see it, it's heartbreaking. India has 1.1 or so billion people, of which many are impoverished. And they, you know, there are people out there begging, not because they're lazy, not because they just don't want to work, because that's the only way that they can get anything. And they just barely get by. And they literally have rags on their backs. And yet, I'll tell you what has really amazed me when I've been to like India. I was in a village in a place called Ongole, in South Andhra Pradesh, the state of Andhra Pradesh, and it was a very poor village. And all the Christians that lived in this village worked for a rich farmer, so they made a small amount of money. And it was one of these villages where it literally was mud huts with, you know, thatched roofs, and the church building was a mud hut with a thatched roof. And you know, in India, the predominant faith is Hinduism, and the next largest group of religious people are the Muslims. There's maybe 10%, and a tiny percentage are Christian, and a very, very, very tiny percentage are what we call, you know, true Christians. When a person converts from Hinduism or Islam in India, they are ostracized from their community. It's you know, when a person becomes a Christian in India, that they're sincere, because it makes their life, which was already really, really hard, it makes it even harder. But what really amazed me when I was in India were how thankful they were, and they had nothing. I remember once watching a group of children in Ongole playing, that somebody had put together just a really rough scooter. And there was just one, and every child took a turn, and they never fought over it. There was no squabbling. In Bible class, we would meet for 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the afternoon, and I'm here. The women are here, the men are here, the children are in front of their mothers. I only ever saw one child act up, and as soon as that child acted up, the mom didn't say a thing, the dad didn't say a thing, the other kids were shh, shh, shh. Kids made sure the other one was quiet. It just blew me away. And what really blew me away was how thankful they were. They had so little, but they were just so grateful for what they had. And it certainly is a tremendous lesson for me. It was for my family as I shared it with them, for you. I wish everybody could just go there for just a day, just to realize how blessed we are here, how much we have. And whether it's in this rich part of the world or it's an impoverished part of the world, Christians should be the most thankful people on earth. And we need to understand that nobody's done more for us than God. Nobody. Who more than God is always there for us? Again, our spouse, they're there for us. Our children, our parents, our brothers and sisters, our family, our Christian brethren. But God is always there. Once in a while, we'll let each other down. It happens. God never lets us down, ever. There's nobody who is more worthy of communicating how great they are than God. There's no greater news than that of salvation that we have through Jesus Christ. Nobody's done more for us than God. Nobody's more faithful to us than our God. So have you told anybody about it? Have you told anybody about God? If we find a nice restaurant, we tell people. I do. Toronto has 7,000 restaurants. Maybe I'm just making up a number. They're everywhere. And we got somehow at the breakfast this morning, we got talking about different things that people eat, and somebody brought up horse meat, which seems rather repulsive, I'm sure, to folks. But just around the corner from our house is an Italian butcher shop, and what they sell there is horse meat. Whether you knew it was legal in Canada or not, it certainly is. The Italians love horse meat, Dutch people, French people. I've had it. I thought it was pretty good. And when we find something we like, we tell people. Something good happens to us, we tell people. We get a raise at work, we tell people. But what are we telling people about God? He is awesome. He is great and worthy of us telling people about him all the time. But are we? This is one of those questions as we begin the day or as we end the day, we need to be asking ourselves, who have I told today? Who have I shared with today about how great our God is? It's interesting. Michelle and I, mostly Michelle, homeschooled our children. And we were, for a number of years, involved with a homeschool group not far from where we lived. And it was predominantly Muslim families. And they were quite lovely. We've stayed friends with them through the years. They're good people, the ones that we knew. And I think most are. And they certainly were not ashamed to talk about their faith. They were not ashamed to talk about Allah or Muhammad, whom they perceived to be his prophet. And I think oftentimes put us to shame in their not being afraid or ashamed to talk about their God. Have we shared the good news of the gospel with someone who's lost in sin? Again, we think about what Jesus has done for us and the level of sacrifice that he was willing to make and how much the Father was willing to sacrifice and the Spirit for us. And we think about the message of the gospel, that it's salvation. And the alternative to not being faithful is damnation. And yet, have we shared that good news? And the question is, if not, why not? Why wouldn't we? What's hindering us? The Gospel of Matthew in chapter 10. Matthew chapter 10. In verse 32. Jesus says, therefore, when he's been talking about how Father cares for us and watches over us. And in light of that, whoever confesses me before men, him I will also confess before my Father, who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, him I will also deny before my Father, who is in heaven. And some might say, well, I've not denied God, but if we don't tell people about God, we're denying him. If we don't tell people about Christ and salvation and what is there for us and what is expected of us, we have denied God. In the book of Romans in chapter 10, Romans chapter 10, in verse 9, Romans 10, verse 9, that if you confess with your mouth the Lord Jesus and believe in your heart that God has raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For with the heart one believes unto righteousness, and with the mouth confession is made unto salvation. If you confess with your mouth the Lord Jesus and believe in your heart that God has raised him from the dead, you will be saved. And certainly we understand, as far as our own personal salvation is concerned, we need to confess with our mouth that Jesus Christ is Lord. We need to believe. But in our life as Christians, in our daily walk as Christians, we need to see that this is true as well. We need to be people of faith. We need to be people who believe. Without faith, the Hebrew writer said, it is impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who, what does it say? Diligently seek him. We must be a people of faith, and that faith should be such that we are compelled from a sense of, not just a sense of responsibility, but from a sense of love and from a sense of joy and from a sense of caring for others. We are compelled to share that gospel. Why wouldn't we? We had a brother, I can't remember his name right now, but we had a brother and he regularly goes to Vietnam. And a number of years ago, he was reported by somebody in Vietnam, and they would no longer grant him the extended visas that he'd had for years. And so what he had to do was go to different countries to get a visa, and he's been to different countries in the world to do that. And he came once to Toronto and was staying with the Hamlets, and I invited him to come and share with us at the West End about the work in Vietnam, and it was an amazing discussion that we had together, and the report that he gave was wonderful. Oppression in Vietnam of Christians is a terrible thing. It still is a reality in China, but it's not as bad as it used to be. But Vietnam, if you're a Christian, you are in danger, and it's a constant danger of being found out and exposed and reported, and then you can be jailed for years. They can execute you if they want to, and it happens. And yet, the brethren there are still sharing the gospel. You'd think maybe they should just keep it to themselves. Why risk your life? But they are compelled, based on their thanksgiving and appreciation of what God has done for them. They feel that need to share it with others, even if it puts them in harm's way. We have a sister who for, I think, 7 or 8 years was working in Saudi Arabia, I think in Riyadh, and as a nurse. Many Filipinas go they go all over the world for work, and many have gone to Saudi Arabia to work as nurses, and she was with a group of, a denominational group there, but it's absolutely forbidden there to assemble as Christians. And yet they were. And what they would do is they would always bring a cake and wrapped presents, because if they were if they were raided, they could immediately switch it to a birthday party of all things. But they kept worshiping, because even if they pretended it was a birthday party, they could still be found out. And execution is the punishment. They still have in Saudi Arabia executions, public executions, beheadings. You have a fun-filled afternoon of dinner at McDonald's and then go watch a beheading. But there are also in Saudi Arabia, there are faithful Christians that live there and assemble there, and as they can, carefully share the gospel there. And you do have to be careful, but they share it. Why wouldn't we want to tell others how great our God is? What could possibly hinder us from sharing it? Well, there's a couple things, of course. Fear. We're afraid, maybe afraid to be laughed at, made fun of, mocked, ridiculed. Maybe we're afraid to share it because we don't know the word the way we should. Well, if that's the case, we need to be diligent to learn it. But there should be nothing that hinders us. Fear shouldn't hinder us. Embarrassment. A lack of knowledge shouldn't hinder us. What it should do is encourage us to grow in knowledge. Because we should be telling people. It is our responsibility, and it's all of our responsibilities to be telling people about what our God has done for us, how great He is, about how great His Son is, and about the Word that we hold in our hands. The New Testament is the only way that a person is ever going to see God and to be able to spend eternity with God. So I'll leave these thoughts with you. Encourage you to consider what I've said, study on it, and as you find it true, to apply it.